Welcome to First Christian Church's Adult Fellowship Bible Study. We continue in our study of the book of Isaiah from the Old Testament, now moving into chapter 8. Scholars remind us that Isaiah involves much poetic and symbolic language, so we must pause and catch that symbolism's meaning, placing it in the time that it was written, if we plan on understanding it. And other scholars add even further, it is not a literal writing. That is, the meaning is not to be taken literally, it is symbolic. Here today, the symbolic actions represent a prophet's is laying a curse and ruin on the rebellious people, as he advises the king also. And the reason for this is that the people, meaning the people of Judah, have turned to idol worship rather than following the God of Israel. That curse is coming from the land of rivers, meaning Assyria, which would be from the Tigris-Euphrates river system and a large area around that, including a number of countries that are in that part of the world at that time. And that army then that will be unleashed from Assyria is being symbolized here as a flooded river striking these people. So let's read Isaiah chapter 8 in its entirety, reading from the New Revised Standard Version. Then the Lord said to me, "Take a large tablet and write in it in common characters, quote, belonging to Maher-shalal-hash-baz, and have it attested to me by reliable witnesses, the priest Uriah and Zechariah, son of Jeberechiah. And I went to the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. Then the Lord said to me, name him Maher-shalal-hash-baz, for before the king knows how to call before the child knows how to call my father or my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoils of Samaria will be carried away by the king of Samaria. The Lord spoke to me again, because this people has refused the waters of Shalom, that flow gently and melt in fear before Rezin, the son of Ramallah. Therefore, the Lord is bringing up against it the mighty floodwaters of the river, the king of Assyria, and all his glory. It will rise above its channels and overflow all its banks. It will sweep on into Judah as a flood, and pouring over, it will reach up to the neck, and its outspread wings will fill the breadth of your land. O Emmanuel. Band together, you people, and be dismayed. Listen, all of you four countries. Gird yourself and be dismayed. Gird yourself and be dismayed. Take counsel together, but it shall be brought to naught. Speak a word, but it will not stand, for God is with us. For the Lord spoke thus to me, while his hand was strong upon me, and warned me not to walk in the way of the people, saying, do not call conspiracy all that this people calls conspiracy, and do not fear what is fear, or be its dread. But the Lord of hosts, him you shall regard as holy. Let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. He will become a sanctuary, a stone one strikes against. For both the house of Israel, he will become a rock one stumbles over, a trap and a snare for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many among them shall stumble, they shall fall and be broken, they shall be snared and taken. Bind up the testimony, seal the teaching among my disciples. I will wait for the Lord, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. See, I and the children whom the Lord has given me are signs and portents in Israel from the Lord of hosts, and dwell on Mount Zion. Now if people say to you, consult the ghost and the family spirits that chirp and mutter, should not a people consult their gods, the dead, on behalf of the living, for teaching and for instructions? Surely those who speak like this will have no dawn. They will pass through the land, greatly distressed and hungry. When they are hungry, they will be enraged, and will curse their king and their gods. They will turn their faces upwards, for they will look to the earth, but will see only distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish, and they will be thrust into darkness. We also saw much symbolism, symbolic language. I've seen it throughout Isaiah, but chapter 7 preceding this also was loaded with it. Where there, that symbolic language was presented in the third person. Here it's primarily in the first person narrative. And so it's almost, as scholars say, an autobiographical framework of the prophet Isaiah, according to Dr. Eugene Tucker of Emory University School of Theology and others. The issue initially relates to circumstances around the Assyrio-Ephraimitic war against and King Ahaz of Judah, who's caught up in the situation. So it's a continuation in a way of what was going on in chapter 7. The prophet is giving him signs that should be reassuring in the face of this fear approaching him. Recall, though, that king Ahaz did not want signs, but as you can see, the prophet is giving him signs anyway. But this is in the form of the prophet Isaiah here is giving him these signs, which is a prophet's job. He is to advise the king and the people, and he's not to tell them what they want to hear, but what they need to hear. He's not a yes man. This reading is divided into sort of four distinct sections, scholars note. The first four verses are symbolic action concerning the naming of Isaiah's child, and in that name is buried the meaning of a message for the king. In verse 5 through 10 concerns the prophet receiving and delivering that word from the Lord. In verses 11 through 15, the prophet Isaiah is recalling his encounter with the Lord as to not follow the same, in other words, don't get trapped up in this same conspiracy idea that the people have. Instead, you follow me, the Lord. And verses 16 through 22, a message from Isaiah to his disciples to close this prophecy, to close this message, because they have rejected God, and so therefore they don't get to receive God's advice in the future. However, they will receive the punishment. So let's first there look at verses 1 through 4 a little bit. The objective here, scholars suggest, is not actually autobiographical, although it appears to be, but is relying on a method of conveying a coded message, so to speak, in the name of a child that is yet to be born. Note that message is from the Lord. Isaiah is just the messenger. Write the message on a scroll. That is ordinary writing. And many scholars say this would be ordinary writing on their the equivalent of paper, which was a leaf material. In other words, this is not not to be designed as long. This is not being carved in stone, they say. As this is and it's to be written in simple words that people can understand. It's ordinary writing. This is a time-sensitive message. It's not designed to last for a long time. It's designed not for posterity, but for that short time. And he's to obtain credible witnesses, and those witnesses are Uriah, who would be the high priest at that time, and Zechariah. This Zechariah that's here is not the future or another prophet, so to speak, that we have a book in the Bible from, scholars say, but most likely is the father-in-law, in other words, of Ahaz at the time. His name was Zechariah, so people suspect that's who this is. The words he wrote on the scroll were Mahar Shalah Hashbaz. I think that might be one of the longest words in the Bible. What means quick to ponder, swift to spoil, notes the NIV translators, and similar interpretation in several other footnoted Bibles. The prophet then has, as instructed by that, has sexual relationships with the prophetess, and she conceives and gives the birth of this would be now at least the second son mentioned in the storyline, so we assume it's his second son, which Isaiah names according to what was written on the scroll. And before that child is, so in other words, this is a short period of time where that child's old enough to say mama or papa. The wealth of Damascus, meaning Syria, and the spoils of Samaria, or Ephraim, the northern 10 tribes of Israel, will be gone, be taken away by Assyria. So this will happen soon, in that king's lifetime, and not some long distance future, scholars say, is the idea here. This disaster, scholars say, is clearly near term, affiliated with that war event. Notice here, teaches Dr. Tucker, that this woman is not called his wife, but prophetess. Whether she's his wife or not, we don't know. But he says, he and others suggest what it's implying is she also has some sort of maybe temple role or religious role or religious functionary of some sort, even though she may also be his wife. And those say most likely is at least one of his wives, if not his only wife. We know from history that beginning in 732 BC, that the king of Assyria defeated Damascus, that is Syria, and removed Pekah, king of Samaria, which he was the king of the northern 10 tribes at the time, and set in his place over as the king over that area, Hosea, as king over Israel, the northern 10 tribes, if you will. King Ahaz of Judah then sold out to the Syrians. He didn't join that coalition. He sold out to the Syrians, trying to forsake a war with his people and preserve his army, preserve his people. Verses 5 through 10 here, the prophet announces that Isaiah will also, Assyria will also sweep over Judah, because those people have refused the waters of Shalom. That is, contrast with the waters of Syria. In other words, they had a choice. They could choose the waters of Jerusalem, that is, the waters of the spring that the Jews considered holy. That means that, and water that was supposedly selected by God for them. That likely also means here that they have refused then to continue to maintain that their kingship loyalty is to the Davidic dynasty, and now have allowed, by submission, they're being ruled indirectly from Assyria, a Gentile nation. They have accepted the waters of the rivers and rejected the springs of Shalom. So they will be flooded by the Assyrian army up to their neck, likely meaning, some scholars say, will cover just about everything except Jerusalem. This army will siege Jerusalem, but it'll only be up their neck. They will not drown, but it's going to be a close call. So Judah will be devastated, but not completely destroyed. This seems to be short. Some scholars say this is also seems to be here in this area, verses 5 through 10, even a short oracle in its own side towards the people, rather than the king. Verses 11 through 15, in some ways, these verses are almost confessional and personal relative to Isaiah. But scholars generally conclude they are really not that in form or intended form. There are more to confirm that this prophet has integrity. He is laying out here what was told to him and for the king's benefit. In the face of strong opposition, probably from the king, he is letting the king know, this is what God has said to me. I'm telling you, and I'm laying it out here as straight as I know how, exposing my vulnerability completely for your benefit. The message is not to be given to the enemy. They're not to join the enemy. They're not to join this conspiracy that's been formed between the other countries and so forth. But that's exactly what Ahaz does. They're to fear the Lord, and not a king from some other part of the world. They submitted, in this case, though, to that enemy king, preserving their country for a while. Verses 16 through 22, the prophet gave them God's advice in advance of this. But they rejected it, so God has now hidden himself from them. God is silent to them here, since their king and those people failed to trust him. However, Isaiah and his disciples, in other words, those who follow Isaiah, still have hope and trust that these Judean people will will survive. In time, they will see their error. They'll curse the king. They'll curse the invading army and their pagan king, as well as their pagan gods that they are now adopting. They will find no answers on earth. They'll only find darkness, because the light is with God in heaven. The prophet's idea seemed to be that their God has assured Judah he would protect them, or at least a remnant of them. If they were loyal and obedient to that one God. And so the idea here that through Isaiah's disciples, he and the disciples will remain a remnant, as well as some others that then accept it, that that's what's going on in time. King Ahaz was disobedient to that God, as he did not trust God. In other words, what did he do wrong? He failed to trust God. That's one scholar puts it. Core meaning: to fear and obey God, to trust God, do not trust earthly kings, is the message then to the people. Although God has turned his face against them for now, he still offers them that hope and a sanctuary from the world's kings, if they will repent and obey and return to God, at least for a remnant of them. Dr. Christopher Seitz, writing from Yale at the time, notes in his commentary that both Israel both Isaiah and the king only need to wait about 9 months for this to happen, based on history. In other words, until that baby's born and plays before he's a year old. So 18 months maybe at the most, they say. And they'll see that prophecy fulfilled. So the king, the prophets, and the people must wait for the Lord's message to be fulfilled. But it will not be long. And history pretty well shows that's kind of how it turned out. So in this case, prophecy does take time to be fulfilled. But in this case, it's short term. It's related to the Syro-Ephraimite War, says Dr. Seitz, there in the 8th century BC. The final verse, 21 and 22, according to Dr. Seitz, reflect that period of hardship is already beginning here. He adds, what is finally established is neither the house of David at that point, nor this people, but only the word of God remains as a testimony, teaching from the form of Isaiah. That word will become a sanctuary to these people in future times. So the message of God will be preserved in the Israelite remnant and in that scroll, in their scrolls, the Old Testament scrolls, or what those Israelite people come to refer to in Isaiah's writing those as the writings. In other words, the first 5 books and the rest of it is the writings. And it's this lesson about not resisting or rejecting God, but following God and not earthly kings. That's kind of the way several of the lead scholars look at this. Of course, you can find in certain branches of the Christian interpretation where people say, no, this is all having to do with things that are yet to come that we haven't even faced yet. But that's not the way that the academic and the lead theological scholars are looking at this writing here in chapter 8. Hope you have a good Bible study, and we'll hope to catch you in another lesson.